Today is June 28th, 2024. I'm Gabrielle Fellows with the Museums of Lake County, and this is an oral history interview with Richard Schmidt. Richard, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
So to get started, what can you tell us about your name? Were you named after anyone?
I was named after my father, Richard Virgil, and my great-grandfather, Richard Prinder Patterson.
And what is your date of birth and how old are you?
My date of birth is January 14th, 1947. I'm 77 years old.
And where were you born and raised?
I was born in San Francisco, California, and I was raised in Richmond, California, and El Sobrante, California.
What were your parents' names?
My dad's name was Richard, and my mother's name was Bonnie.
Do you have any siblings?
I've got 2 sisters and 3 brothers.
And what are their names?
Lynette and Teresa, Edward, Manuel, and John.
And who is the oldest ancestor that you know about?
Oh, Jackson Daniel Patterson. He was the sheriff of Searcy County, Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
He was my grandfather on my mother's side.
Do you know where your ancestors migrated from?
Ireland, France, and Germany.
Okay. And describe the neighborhood or community you grew up in.
Let me see. Okay. We lived in Richmond when I was younger, and it was just a normal little town with city blocks and sidewalks and parks, and there was a elementary school right down the street from our house. A lot of trees in the neighborhood, quiet, except for there was a railroad track that run behind the house.
Oh, okay. What
Just
kind of
pretty much a
train?
normal, huh?
What kind of train was it? A passenger train?
Passenger and freight.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote a story kind of about that, about the train. A couple of them actually. Then when I was about 8 years old, we moved to El Sobrante, and there weren't any sidewalks, and it was a gravel road, and it was wide open spaces, and there was ranches, and you could just go. I got a horse when I was around 11, and but I had to share it. It wasn't just my horse.
What was the horse's name?
Pat.
Okay. What kind of horse was it?
It was just an old, probably a quarter horse cross with a thoroughbred, and she was pretty gentle, so I shared it, but I had to share it with my brother and sister at the time. So it wasn't, I guess, yeah, it wasn't just my horse, but at the time we just had a couple of acres, and my dad was just trying it out for us, I guess. 'Cause my mother was raised on using horseback mostly in Arkansas. My dad was from Illinois, and he lived kind of in town.
What did your father do for a living?
He worked for PG&E as a lineman and became a supervisor and retired after 30 years.
Oh, okay.
In the Richmond Bay Area.
And what did your mother do for a living?
My mother was a beautician, and she owned her own beauty salon, and retired from that after about 50 years. She was 81 when she retired.
Wow.
She dressed hair till she was 81.
Wow. So tell me some more about your parents.
Oh, my dad was in the Navy in Pearl Harbor. He was a gunner's mate, and he got a eardrum. He had a problem with his ears, and so they mustered him out, and he told him he could go to work in a government project during that time. And so he went to work in the shipyards in Richmond. my mother was raised in Marshall, Arkansas, Searcy County, Arkansas, and her and her, there were 7 of them, brothers and sisters, three girls and 4 boys, and they all migrated out to California at one time or another before the war, and worked in the fields in Salinas, but my mother ended up going to work in the shipyards during the war. And
Okay.
It was her sister, one of her sisters, and her brother. One of her brothers ended up working there after the war. He got hurt and ended up going to Richmond. Anyway, I forget where I was. So she worked. That's where my parents met. Was in the shipyards in Richmond.
Yeah.
My dad was from Illinois, and my mother was from Arkansas. They didn't never run into each other, but they did in that shipyard. They were on their way home on a ferry boat to San Francisco from Richmond. There used to be a ferry run from San Francisco to Richmond, and that's where they met.
Was your mama Rosie the Riveter?
Yes, ma'am. But she, her and her sister said we weren't riveters, we were welders. They were welders, but they're memorialized in a museum down in Richmond, the Rosie the Riveter Museum.
Oh, okay.
My aunt ended up going to Washington a few years ago and met the president and the vice president. With six Rosies were shipped out there for a week or so.
Oh, cool.
When Obama was president.
Oh, okay.
And so we're pretty proud of them.
So, what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Oh, I got a good one. There was an ice cream man in Richmond, and he rode a 3-wheeled bicycle, and the one wheel was in the back and 2 wheels were in the front, and in between those 2 wheels there was a box, a big white box, and then across the handlebars there was these bells, and the ice cream man was dark skinned, but he had real white curly hair, and everybody called him Cotton. Most of the kids called him Cotton. I guess they got it from the name from him. And if you heard those bells and you got to the street in time with a dime, he'd open up the lid off that box, and you could reach in and pick out a ice cream. And I remember the orange popsicles that had vanilla ice cream in the middle is the ones that I liked. But that's probably about the earliest I can think of in Richmond. I went to elementary school in that school from kindergarten to the 3rd grade. And then we moved to El Sobrante.
What other schools have you attended?
Well, Pullman Elementary, that one we just talked about, and Woodrow Wilson Elementary, these are all in Richmond, St. Cornelius Elementary, and then I went to Salesian High School in San Pablo, which is right out of Richmond, and De Anza High School, which is in El Sobrante, College Park High School, and Richmond. I graduated from Richmond High School in 1965.
Okay. And do you have any other childhood memories?
I probably do, but I went to summer camp. I sold soap and for the YMCA and got to go to summer camp, so I paid my way through summer camp. Went to Camp Ravencliff up out of Eureka, and I don't know. Got my horse. I did a lot. That part was pretty good there. And my dad, I wanted a bicycle, and my dad bought me a milk cow instead.
Oh.
So I got up every morning and milked that cow before I went to school, and then I had to milk that cow when I come home before supper. But I sold butter, and I made butter and milk, and sold it to the neighbors, and got enough money to buy myself a saddle.
Cool.
So I didn't end up wanting a bicycle after a while because I wanted to ride horses.
So what were your favorite subjects in school?
English.
What'd you like about English?
Had a good teacher, and well, even in the ninth grade, I had went to Salesian High School. It was an all boys Catholic school, and there was one of the brothers, Father John Maxwell. He wasn't a brother; he was a priest. He gave me books to read that I enjoyed, Jack London and those kinds of books that I enjoyed reading. But then when I got into high school, I had a teacher in the 11th grade that encouraged me to write. And I think I remember her as the one that tipped the scales, pushed me that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I ended up, I'm a writer, and now. So
Did you have a best friend as a kid?
I don't know that I had a best friend. I had a lot of friends. But I made friends that I still talk to and visit with after 65 years knowing them. But as far as a best friend, I went to 4 different high schools. I went to a lot of different schools. I just never stayed in one school long enough, really, I guess. But neighborhood kids, and one of the neighborhood kids and I still communicate on our birthdays are a day apart. And since we were 10, we've kept in touch.
Oh, okay.
So I guess he's my longest friend, probably.
Did you have any pets as a child?
Well, that's where I got goofed up because that horse. I had a dog. I had a pup, Boots. It was a German short hair pup, and then we had that horse. It wasn't really a pet, and I had to share it, so it wasn't really mine. But the dog was mine. Mm-hmm. And I got it when I was young, and my brother and sister were born after me, so I was the oldest. I ended up owning the pup because my dad brought it home when I was about, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 years old or so. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
So how has the world changed since you were young?
We've got cell phones. We landed on the moon. What didn't happen? We've got the internet. Oh boy, I had a pretty good list. Yeah, we had cell phones, personal computers, and the internet. And a lot of things. We got electric cars and a lot more people. Mm-hmm. El Sobrante, when it started out, there was about maybe a dozen houses in the valley there where we lived, and there's probably 12,000 houses in it today. Just everything kind of got sprawled out. Mm-hmm. I was glad that I ended up coming to Lake County. My dad bought the place in Lake County when I was about, I don't know, 1959 or so. And so when I got out of school, I headed for Cobb Mountain. Mm-hmm. And went to work at Hobergs. I had worked at Hobergs Resort when I was a kid. During the summer, I could ride. I had a buckskin mare. I could ride from the cemetery, Glenbrook Cemetery on Bottle Rock Road, up. There's an old stagecoach trail that goes along the side of Bottle Rock Road, and then cut up into the hills to Hobergs, and then ride back at night. And my dad let me stay up there as long as I didn't get in trouble, and the Hobergs took care of me, and I got plenty to eat. And I had a couple of calves out there, so I had, plenty to keep me out of trouble, and there wasn't really any trouble you could get into, So, but then when I got out of high school, I went back up there and worked in the summer a couple of years, and then when I decided I actually got married and moved to Cobb Mountain. Before I come up there, I went and talked to George Hoberg and got a job washing dishes, and I just stayed on for till 72, 73. They sold it in 72. I did everything you could think of: wash dishes, maintenance, lifeguarding, ran a garbage truck for them, fire truck, anything you could do. And you could, if you wanted to make more money, you just had to work more hours. I think I was getting $1.65 an hour when I started, plus meals, and then and room, a room. And then when I got to be head maintenance, I was getting $1.95 an hour, and they gave me a house to live in right there on the resort, and my wife and all our meals. So,
What was the resort like back then?
well, it was, there were about 300 units, cabins and motel and hotel. There was a lot of trees. It was just a real nice place right up there at the top of 175. They had a coffee shop. There was a bar and a coffee shop. They had cabins that were built at the first cabins they built when they started Hobergs, when they settled there, the Hobergs, and all the way through the 60s, the different kinds of building. They had a big lawn and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. I lifeguarded that pool part-time, with a snack bar, a tennis court, and a big barbecue area. They had all kinds of events out there. They had a lot of Lions conventions, and all different outfits come up there. I think Seventh-day Adventists had conventions in the spring. And then there was a hotel. Between the hotel and the main dining room, which was the room was probably 4 times the size of this room. And the kitchen was attached to that. They had just every kind of cabin you could think of, duplexes and nice little cabins, stucco walls on the outside, and which the people came to the resort and stayed maybe for a week or 2 at a time with their families. The wives would come up, and then the husbands would come up on weekends between work. It was just a lot of trees, big pine trees, oak trees, wildflowers, the whole place. And it was the only place right there. So when you came up, you got the Hobergs. There was a big entryway. They had these big box-like pillars, and somebody told me they used to keep their slot machines in there years ago. Well, I think you talked to somebody from Siegler's.
Darlene.
Darlene, right?
Yeah.
She told me about the ones at Siegler's. Yeah, it was just an amazing place. A lot of activity in the summer, nothing going on in the winter. But I lived on the mountain, so I they kept me working year round, doing repair work and stuff like that, because I lived right there close. Most of the employees were just summer help, and they'd all go back to wherever they lived, full time in the winter, in the fall.
How many people were at the resort at any given time during the summer?
There's maybe 300 to 600 people, just depending on summer vacation for the kids getting out of school. So you had a lot more families up there. The conventions in the spring, they had several Lions conventions where a lot of people showed up for those. A lot of husbands and wives. Somebody said we could feed 700 people, but we only had about 300 dishes. So wash the dishes, you were busy.
Yeah.
Getting them back out there. And they would have a brunch and then supper, and they did all prime rib suppers, and I mean it was just good food, good eating. I could eat in the help's kitchen 3 meals if I wanted, and I could eat 2 meals in the big dining, from the big kitchen. I could eat anything I wanted all day long.
Do you remember how many chefs there were?
I looked at that question, and it's kind of hard to say because it would change during the conventions. Here, I got it. There was always a head chef and 2 or 3 chefs helping him, and they had a big rotisserie oven. They had somebody taking care of that all the time. They had usually a woman making salads, and they had to make a lot of salads. Serving that many people, and brunch was breakfast and lunch, so there was a lot of eggs getting broke, and I think I broke eggs for one of those conventions. I broke layers and layers of eggs in a big pot, stirred it up with a big, like a drill with a mixer on the end of it. Oh yeah. Anyways,
so what was George Hoberg's nickname for you?
Schmitty. Called me Schmitty.
And tell me about him, your memories of him.
Oh, he was really a fun guy. He was there all the time, but he wasn't like a boss. He was more like a guide. And Frank Blues was either a cousin, somewhere in there they were distant cousins or relatives. Frank Blues was from the city, and he was a butcher. He pretty much run the place as far as employees. And his son is the one that taught me the carpenter trade, Frankie Blues. You asked me about that later on. But George, one of the things he used to do, they had these hors d'oeuvres that they had a place called the Pine Bowl. It was a big dance hall across the road from the resort. And they would have a band up there on weekends, an old-time band, and they would have these big trays of hors d'oeuvres to haul up there, scallops. The ones that were the best was the deep-fried scallops, right? And Frank, if he caught you eating off one of those trays, he'd yell at you. There was a little Volkswagen, like a Volkswagen pickup. It had sideboards on it, and you could put those big trays full of hors d'oeuvres in it, come out the back of the kitchen, and drive up to the Pine Bowl, and then I'd deliver bring the trays on into the Pine Bowl, and George would be in there telling me where to put them, and he'd say, "Come here, Smitty." We'd grab a couple of those scallops and eat them. He'd like to do that. He said, "Don't let Frank catch you." He was that kind of guy. He was just a good guy, but he took care of business too. So I liked him. I really liked him, and I like Frank too, Pops. And it's just like a family. Just like regular people.
So talk about picking up guests from Hobergs Airport.
So they had these conventions. They called them fly-in conventions. People would fly in from all over California, I guess, and I don't know where else, and land at that airport at the bottom of Cedar Canyon. And it's in a valley. It's not a very long airport. So, and Hobergs had a station wagon, and I would take the station wagon and drive down to the airport. I forget if it took 20 minutes or a half an hour. And there'd be people waiting, or there'd be a plane landing, and I'd help load their gear and haul them back up to the resort. And then when the convention was over, I'd haul them back down. And one time a guy came in an old fighter plane, and it was one of those things, I'd never even been on an airport in my life, and here they got one in a canyon in Lake County, and people are flying in from all over the place, and they'd get so plastered. I'd put them back in those airplanes, and you'd think they'd never make it out of that canyon, but there never was any trouble. So one time George had the station wagon, and I was waiting at the hotel because there were people down there. There was a phone down there in the hangar, and they'd call when somebody got in there. So I'm waiting, and here George comes in with a station wagon and gets out, and I said, "I got to go to the airport." He says, "Okay, go." And so I took off, and when I got back, everybody was standing out in front of the hotel, the whole office crew, and George. And he said, "Where's the money, Smitty?" He had gone to get the cash for the weekend for the convention, and when he got out of the car, he left it behind the seat, behind the driver's seat, and they didn't know me that well then. They didn't know if I'd run off with it or not. I didn't even know it was there. He got it out of there. That was just one of those little things that I can remember that happened. But that's pretty much.
Do you remember any other stories from Hobergs?
Oh, yeah, kinda.
How much was it to stay there?
I don't know that. I was night watchman because, like I say, you could do as much work as you could. You could work 24 hours if you could stay awake. So I was night watchman in the office, and that's the only time I was ever really in there to do anything. So I never really had that information.
Where were all the guests from?
Mostly the Bay Area, San Francisco. They'd been coming to Hobergs from San Francisco when they were still riding stagecoaches up there. So, but Sacramento, and Marin County, I think, probably. There's a lot of things that I don't really know because I was busy. You didn't really spend a lot of time with the guests, unless you were unplugging a toilet or doing something like that, or lifeguarding. But
So your wife lived there with you?
yes, actually, my first daughter was born during a Lions convention in May of '72 or so.
Is that your current wife?
No, I've run through. I'm on my fourth marriage.
What was your first wife's name?
Susan.
And what was your daughter's name?
Selena.
What is your daughter's name?
Selena Marie. She was born at Redbud Hospital. We took off. Well, the convention was coming in on a Tuesday, and we took off Monday in my pickup out the back, 175. It was a long haul back then. The highways were a little bit narrower, and then to Clear Lake to the hospital. I was behind the doctor, or the doctor was behind me, and she didn't know that was me in that pickup. And when I got to the hospital, she said, "Why didn't you go faster? I was right behind you." She saw that I pulled in that pickup. Anyways, there was a doctor, a husband and wife, a pair of doctors in Kelseyville at the time. They had a health clinic there, and you could go to the doctor and get all your stuff, the prenatal things and all the stuff you needed, all the care, and you paid for that. And you, one day in the hospital, if you had to stay more, it cost more. But I think it was around $300. And I could watch the delivery. There was a spot she showed me. You can sit up here and you can watch the delivery. They didn't have it where you could go in yet back then and watch. So yeah, I saw that baby girl. Now she's a grandma.
Really?
She's about 54 years old, and she lives in Napa.
So that makes you a great grandpa.
Oh man,
right?
I've got 17 grandkids and a half a dozen great grandkids.
Wow.
I've got 2 grandsons on the way. One was just born on Father's Day in Napa, and my youngest daughter's going to have a baby, and she's in Billings, Montana, and she's going to have a baby at the end of July.
So how many children total do you have?
I had 4 daughters and 1 son.
Okay.
I brought some pictures of them.
So did your wife work at the resort too?
Yes.
What'd she do?
She was a waitress.
Oh, okay.
And she was real little. She was about 5'2". And those trays were big oval trays. And she could pack a tray. And about the time she was working there, that Johnny Cash song, "Boy Named Sue," come out. Mm-hmm. And so and they had name tags. So I put on her name tag, "My name is Sue, how do you do?" And she got more tips than anybody, and she could carry more plates than anybody. And so yeah, she did a hell of a good job. And then of course when the resort closed in 1972, so I had moved out to the ranch in Cobb Valley, and so I wasn't living on the resort anymore, and we're having kids, so she was busy with that. I stayed on to help the new owners make the transition and show them where all the stuff was that you had to take care of. You had to do the pool maintenance and electrical and the boiler room, and there's just a lot of things that were underneath the skin of the resort that had to be taken care of. So
who bought the resort?
It was an outfit, Maharishi something. I can't remember the name exactly, but they were transcendental meditation sort of people. It was a total swerve from the culture of Cobb Mountain. But they were nice people, but they didn't last long. And as time went on, the resort changed hands a couple of times, and I really didn't have much information about that. Yeah, so.
So what will you take with you from your experience at Hobergs?
You know, for one thing, I learned several different trades just working on those buildings, and I learned a carpenter's trade, and Frankie got me in the union as an apprentice carpenter. We started building houses. We built the first houses at Hidden Valley Lake and out of Middletown. A lot of just a hell of an education in a very short time. And I wasn't long out of high school when I started working there, and that actually was the first couple of jobs I had was at Hobergs. But I learned plumbing. I learned all the construction trade. So I became a general contractor.
Oh, okay.
So I studied, did my apprenticeship at Hidden Valley with Frankie Blues, and I became a journeyman carpenter, and then there wasn't a lot of work in Lake County, and you had to travel. We traveled a lot. He and I, we went to Wairika and built stuff up there for Boise Cascade, and went to Nevada and opened up a cabinet shop in Virginia City and worked up there for a while, and things kind of went dry in Nevada, and came back to California, and I built all over the Bay Area and built a couple of houses here in at Cobb, and so yeah, if I took something that and the people that kind of got me through that early part of my life with a lot of kindness and guidance, and they're all buried in the. I donated a bunch of land to the cemetery at Glenbrook Cemetery, the parking lot and the property behind it, and all of the people that I met, not all of them, but a lot of the people that I met at Hobergs, George Jr. and the Blueses, and just that cemetery, they're all there. Mm-hmm. They're all there. So I kind of helped out, give them a nicer place to stay.
Who was your favorite boss and why?
Frankie. And we were like brothers, and he was like an older brother, and he could teach me. He was firm, but he was interesting. I mean, he was showing me things, tricks, this or that, and then I'd say, well, how do you do that? He says, you don't get to learn that until fall. We're saving that for later. But he taught me so much about everything to do with woodworking. We built furniture, we built cabinets, we built houses from the ground up. Just we were like brothers. We traveled together. When we went to Wairika, we camped out on the back porch of a sales office for Boise Cascade on the Klamath River. We spent all our late afternoons sitting in the middle of that river with a mason jar full of ice and whiskey, trying to catch those fish that were the salmon coming up to spawn. Just, we worked, but we had a lot of fun when we weren't working.
So talk about being the poet laureate of Lake County.
The poet laureate is an appointment. It's a county appointment. And my job, I was poet laureate for 2 years. Well, my job as poet laureate is to promote and encourage poetry and writing among the people of Lake County. I had been doing that anyway for quite some time. Once I retired, and I'd been building a ranch down in Martinez, and I finally got that done, and I retired. I'd been living on that ranch in my travel trailer. Come back home, I had a place out in Bachelor Valley, and I read an ad in the paper about a writing workshop at the Main Street Gallery in Lakeport. And I thought, well, it's about time. I'd been writing a little bit for myself over the years, but I never really had time to do it. And so I went into that workshop and I started writing. They liked what I wrote, and I was encouraged to write by the people that I met in that workshop, and so it became a thing, and as time went on, I became a better writer, and I got to where I was able to encourage people to write, and there's a long list of one of the of people that I helped along the way. So it was easy for me to do what I was supposed to do as poet laureate, because I'd already been doing it for quite a few years before I became poet laureate. I worked with Poetry Out Loud as an event for Lake County for the schools. The kids recite a poem from an old famous poet, and they recite it from memory on stage in front of an audience, and all the different high schools have kids competing for that. I'd go to the high schools and help the teachers and help the kids, and read a little, write a little, whatever. I did that for years before I became poet laureate, so I just kept on doing what I'd been doing, and having writing workshops where people come and maybe 5 or 6 people in a group, or maybe a dozen, depending, and have a workshop, and they would write, and we would they'd read what they wrote, and we would give them positive feedback. Same with the writing circles. I did library events, promoting people's books, gather 3 or 4 different authors together and there's 4 libraries in Lake County, and just hit all the libraries week after week, and get people to come in and meet the authors. It was a pretty busy deal. And then book signings, obviously. I've got about 5 books wrote, and I've got one that's just going to be ready at the end of probably the end of summer.
What's that book called?
Poor People. It's a collection. It's a collection of short stories. I don't like to use the word collection. My publisher said a collection makes people think it's something that was just sitting there on a shelf and you gathered it together. Said so. It's a book of short stories. I've got. I brought some of my books to show you. 5 books on Amazon right now.
Oh, okay.
A book of poetry, a novella, a novel, and a collection of short stories. Back when it was still okay to do call it a collection, and one that we did the Lakeside Writers Guild was an outfit with myself and Hal Bennett, a writing teacher, and four or five women, and so we did an anthology. And actually, one of some of the stories in that anthology became part of the play that we put on here in this very room years ago, when I brought some of the flyers for that.
So what kinds of poetry do you write?
Mostly cowboy poetry. I wrote a kind of a little requiem thing for my father-in-law at the time. Was a rodeo cowboy. That he and Reba McEntire's father and Ben Johnson rodeoed their way from Oklahoma out to California, and I ended up marrying his stepdaughter, and we became close. Well, he died. They were living in Lucerne, and when he died, my brother-in-law asked me to write something for the funeral, and people from all over rodeo. He was in the rodeo association that was called the Turtles before there was ever a rodeo association, and so he had friends, rodeo friends from all over the country. They all showed up at this in Lakeport at the funeral home, and I had wrote this little like a poem for the requiem, and somebody or my brother-in-law after the funeral, he says, that's pretty good. You ought to try doing that. And so that was the first cowboy poem I ever wrote, and it was for a funeral. And so I've got a book. I wrote probably 20 or 30 poems, and I get called back to the radio station on Thanksgiving. I wrote one about Black Friday, and every year I go on KPFZ and recite that, read that poem for them.
Oh, okay. So what kinds of images do you paint with watercolors?
Yeah. Portraits and animals and flowers, landscapes, just about anything. Just about anything. I brought some of those with me today. Whatever occurs to me. And my wife actually is a watercolor teacher. She does a class every Wednesday at the Lakeport, at the Main Street Gallery in Lakeport. And so sometimes if they're doing, because it's a beginner's class and I've been painting for a while, I see something that they're doing and I'll work on that too, just out of the blue. Depends on whatever it is. But
how did you learn how to paint?
I took a watercolor class at the Main Street Gallery and ended up marrying the teacher. So I don't have to pay for the classes. Diana, she's been teaching for about 20 years.
So talk about your artwork that was on display at the courthouse.
I had an acrylic up there this last time. Well, so 2 or 3 times a year, artists are invited to share to bring their work to the courthouse, and you can put a price tag on it. And they put it all over the court, in all the hallways and stuff at the courthouse there in Lakeport. And you can keep it up there for 3 months, and it costs you a couple of dollars. And you may sell something or you may not, but it's a way to display your art. And I had one acrylic that I used to do acrylics, and then I got to doing watercolors, but I did an acrylic from a photograph that I found in one of the Lake County resort books of a cabin in Whispering Pines on Cobb, and when I got it done, I put a really nice frame on it, and I put that up there, and I forget what the other one was this last time, but I've put paintings up there probably once a year for 3 or 4 years now.
Mm-hmm. So, have you ever traveled outside the U.S.?
Yes, Mexico. When I was a kid, we went to Tijuana. A bunch of us boys, teenager. But then when Diana and I first got married, we went on a cruise to Mexico. But that's it. I haven't been any further than that off of this continent.
And how would you describe your personality?
You know, I never thought about it. I don't know. I write, so I create characters, and all these characters, some of them come out of my brain, and some of them I've learned from other people, and they've all got personalities. And I was thinking about that question. I thought, well, I've never really thought about my personality, but it's in all my writing. I would think. So you have to read all my stuff to find out.
And talk about your garden and what kinds of plants you grow.
Vegetables, tomatoes, squash, zucchini. I already picked a zucchini this year. Tomatoes are getting big. Peppers, chili peppers. Flowers. I've been putting flowers in lately. I don't know what that means. Getting older, I guess. But yeah, I try to put some color in there amongst some of those vegetables, and my garden's probably about 30 by 30 feet. But it's going up a hill, so I terraced it all off. It's more of it's kind of like a work of art, because it combines construction and planting. So I kind of make it look the way I want it to look, and it's presentable, but yet you can eat it.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of your greatest accomplishments?
Every time I watch one of my children be born, I think that for me to be able to do that, to watch that life come into the world, and have the guts to do it, because it's something that, man, the first time when the doctor told me I could watch, I said, I don't know if I want to do that or not. But I did, and so I'm glad that I did. I guess I'd have to say that.
And what are you the most proud of that you've done in your life?
Encouraged others to write.
And what would you describe as the best day of your life?
I don't think I've had it yet.
What's the greatest lesson you've learned in life?
Never give up.
And what's something in your life you didn't do and you regret it now?
I never made it to Tennessee.
Why did you want to go there?
My relatives on my mother's side migrated from Tennessee to Arkansas at the end of the Civil War. All of the buildings got burnt up, all the records, there's no records in most of those southern states. So the only real records there are or from people's Bibles that they brought with them when they left. And so one of the relatives, one of the names in my mother's side of the family, the last name is Daniel. And so I thought, I'm going to make that one of my goals to get to Tennessee and see if I'm related to Jack Daniel. That's kind of a joke on the side, but I never made it past Arkansas. So I tried to get to the East Coast, you know, and I drive my pickup or pull my trailer or whatever, and I got to this side of Arkansas. I never got any further, and I got to Oklahoma. I've got to Montana and all up through there, and Illinois, but I never got any further. So I figured if I could get to Tennessee, then maybe I'll go a little bit further. And the joke will be if I'm related to Jack Daniel.
And what's the best advice you could give future generations?
Never give up.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I don't know what it'd be. That's an awful lot. I don't know, you know, I can't think of anything right now. There's so many things. Yeah, I just, I came to those last two questions and I put question marks.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, you know, and I started on this when you sent it to me, and then I wrote little answers, and then yesterday and this morning I typed them out on the computer because I wanted to and then they started growing, you know, it started getting bigger. It started out with 2 pages, then it got to be 3. But then by the time I got to the end, I was pretty much had put a lot out there, I thought.
What is your legacy going to be?
I don't know. I just got a deal, an email this morning. It's my Uncle Ralph's 102nd birthday, and 2 of my cousins that are close to the same age as me are back in Arkansas for his birthday. He just turned 102 on the 25th. My Aunt Agnes, who was a Rosie, she made it to 101. So I don't know. I think it's too early. They took one of my books, my cowboy poetry book, and put it in a time capsule out at Hidden Valley because they asked me to come and MC their 50th anniversary celebration at Hidden Valley as a whatever it is. And Moke Simon put my book in the time capsule and put it in a hole. And I said, I'm going to come back. It's a 25-year time capsule. I said, I'll come back and read that book to you when you dig it up. So we'll see. That may end up being my legacy.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today and for sharing your stories.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Well, this is my dad in front of his 36 Plymouth.
Okay.
In Richmond on 41st and Ohio. That's where we lived. This is my dad and my uncle up a 60-foot telephone pole. They used to have to climb them for PG&E.
Oh.
Back before they had the boom trucks, right? That's what my dad did for a living. And it's me and my sister in a PG&E truck on one of the jobs.
Okay.
And this is my dad and my cousin, and we had trailers And this is right across the street from the cemetery on Bottle Rock Road. And this is me and my dad and my mom on 41st in Ohio,
Cool.
in Richmond. And that's my mother. When that's her and her leather, she's welding the Liberty ships.
Okay.
My mom used to do this gal's hair. She was Wendy the Welder.
Oh.
So they had Wendy the Welders because they didn't want to be Rosie the Riveters because they weren't riveters. This is my grandfather, my mother's father. He was a sheriff for Searcy County, Arkansas. That's my Uncle Ralph. He's 104 and he's still wearing his cowboy hat. And this is me and my grandmother, Clara. She's buried in the cemetery at Glenbrook. And this is my aunt and John Wayne at a cattle auction in Arizona.
Cool.
And my Uncle Gene and he were friends. And my Uncle Gene told John Wayne, says, you know, ever since you hooked her, she won't have anything to do with me. This is my daughter and her son, my oldest daughter, Selena Marie, and her son on a horse. I always try to put them kids on a horse right away. And I always had one that was okay for them to sit on. It's one of my babies. You talk about pets, there's 5 Rottweiler pups.
Aw.
These are 3 of my kids. These are the kids from my second marriage.
Okay.
This is my son and my 4 daughters.
Oh, nice.
At this daughter's wedding in Bozeman, Montana. My second wife was Blackfeet Indian.
Oh, really?
So my kids are Blackfeet
wow.
and white, and I guess you want to call colors. And so they were raised on the Blackfeet Reservation in Cutbank, Montana.
Wow.
2 of my daughters were from the Bay Area, but this one of them, my second daughter lives in Utah now, and then my oldest daughter, Selena, lives in Napa.
Oh, okay.
I had a ranch in the hills in Martinez, and that's me and my Rottweiler. This is a view out the window of the house I built myself in Martinez up in the hills. The horses, I left the horses, they could look right through the window. I was building vineyards for a while for an outfit for he was on the board of supervisors in Contra Costa County, and I built that vineyard. And there's a whole lot of acreage, but I built that one on the hillside, and then I built this pumpkin patch and invited all the kids around the area to come and get free pumpkins. This is the first foundation that was built in the Oakland Hills after the big fire, and I built it.
Oh, okay.
I used to do a deal for the newspaper called Creative Expressions, where I encourage people to send in their stuff, stories or poems or whatever, and I put it in the newspaper. This is Lakeside Stories. It's one that took place here.
Oh, it was the play?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it was 2005.
Oh, okay.
I wrote on here. Remember I told you there was a picture of a guy, a chair? That was John Jennings, and he's still around. He's a musician, and he played me in the play.
Okay.
So Lakeside Stories. It's several different stories But it was right here on this stage, and it sold out. It was January 21st, 22nd, and the 23rd, Lakeside Stories.
Okay.
That was from the Lakeside Writers Guild.
What are these two called?
This one is, I don't have titles for them.
Oh, you don't? Oh, okay. Why don't you title your art?
Because I think the reason I don't do it is because it's up to you. It's up to I title my stories. And even then people say, well, what's it about? What's the story about? What's your book about? Well, it's about whatever you read, whatever, it's for you. It makes it, I believe it makes it better if you don't put this is what it's supposed to be in front of it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Then they can interpret it their own way.
Exactly. Because everybody comes back with it. Well, man, that was a pretty good mystery. Well, I didn't think it was a mystery when I wrote it. I just wrote the story, right?
Yeah.
So, and the same with the art, So this isn't an actual picture of a horse. It's a painting of a horse. But you can tell that's what it is. Mm-hmm. But what does it look like to you? So
cool.
This I came back from New Mexico and I painted that picture. This one I've got several different versions of this one. I call it. I said, well, you can't tell if it's a sunset or a sunrise. And most cowboys don't know whether they're coming or going anyway. So that's that part.
Okay. Is there any more? Or is that it?
That's all.